And I just want you to know, and I'm sure you feel this way too, I'm proud of the leaders we have here at Central. With our elders and our deacons and the work that they're doing. A lot of these people are doing so many different things. Our elders, two of them have been on the mission field, visiting Nicaragua. Dennis several times, John I believe twice now. And yes, Marvel Tinker's going to be going in a few more weeks. He's applied for his passport, and we're headed down there in just a few weeks to help build up the leadership, encourage the congregation, and make some plans for this summer for activities of 2 different trips we're looking to make. Our elders believe in missions, they believe in service, they believe in outreach. Our deacons likewise. We are pleasured and privileged to have some good elders and deacons in this congregation. We're not looking to replace anybody, we're looking to add to that. And so keep thinking, meditating, and praying about that very thing. And this morning we're going to talk a little bit about that. Last week we talked some about leadership, and the main point of the lesson basically was that a leader is one that represents God being in control in their life. Now we're going to look at qualifications of elders and deacons this morning, and as you read through these and we talk about these just a bit, you're going to see that in fact represents that God is in control of their life. Now we want to make sure that you're aware again and reminded that there are qualifications for both elders and deacons. So turn to 1 Timothy chapter 3. We look around at religious groups in the world today, and they've deviated from this pattern. And their leadership is different in some places. And what God has written here is intended to be observed. He has set requirements and given descriptions and titles to people that are not just servants, as all of us should be, but somebody that's special within the servant category. And all our elders and all our deacons are servants and such. But there are special things that are to be regarded here. And if we disregard that, we're disrespecting God's authority. If we do something different from that, and ultimately, we're bound for failure in that. And it may not happen immediately, but in the religious world, we've seen where a change in the style of leadership and direction has basically brought about a lot of problems in some of the religious groups as a result of that. We don't want to do that. We don't want to go any further than what the Scriptures teach and to follow it very wholeheartedly. And so we look at these as being important. Now, 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 13 deal with 2 different categories. I'm going to start in verse 8 and talk about the qualifications for deacons. I know Paul laid this out by inspiration in the way he's doing it, but I'm going to back up and deal with the elders as the last part of it here. But as we're looking at deacons, and I'm going to break these qualifications down here, I'm going to look at them from negative qualifications and positive qualities that are mentioned here. Well, let's read verses 8 to 13 together, and then we'll kind of tie them in here. Likewise, after he's been talking about elders now, he says, likewise, deacons must be reverent, not double-tongued, not given to much wine, not greedy for money, but holding the mystery of faith with a pure conscience. But let these also first be tested. Then let them serve as deacons, being found blameless. Likewise, their wives must be reverent, not slanderers, temperate, faithful in all things. Let deacons be the husbands of one wife, ruling their children and their own house as well. For those who have served well as deacons obtain for themselves a good standing and great boldness in the faith which is in Christ Jesus. Deacons. Categories to start with here, the negative qualities are being described. It says, not double-tongued. That means that they're not saying one thing here and then something else there. That representation is that you know when you talk to one of these deacons, they're responsible in what they say and in what they do. Not given to much wine, mentioned also in verse 8 then, which is a description here, not total abstinence from wine, but rather it is being strongly regulated. Now remember that in that day and time, there was not as much purified water as we have nowadays. Running water was quite a luxury, and wine was a common drink. And the wine that they had back then, by the way, didn't run through the same processes that we have in our alcohol today. It's a totally different substance, sometimes not even being alcoholic in nature whatsoever. But still, there's a reservation, even though it was a very common drink, to be careful in how much you drink. You could look to the book of Proverbs and look at Proverbs 23, verses 29 and following, the exhortation that Solomon gives about abstaining from hard drink, avoiding that to every degree. And so we're knowing the difference and understanding that God's not going to be double-tongued either in what he says. If he's talking about this in Proverbs and abstaining from hard drink, that what he is talking about, even and to some degree, is going to be something rather minute, if anything, in alcoholic ways. So not given to much wine, not double-tongued, and number 3, and not greedy for money. That the service that they provide as deacons is a service that is rendered as a gift, not to be rewarded in any which way or to be honored in any special way, but it's something that would be represented to anybody within the congregation, given out as a testimony of who they are and how they believe and follow in Jesus' footsteps. So the negative qualities, again, not double-tongued, not given to much wine, not greedy for money. I would put in that whole category here with the cases we have today of alcoholic drink or whatever, to totally abstain from that would be the wisest decision. And coming from a family, most of you probably know me in my background, but there's a tremendous amount of alcoholism in my family, and you'll know me to be a person that says, just stay away from it. It's not at all wise to be drinking. Positive qualities for deacon. Again, picking up in verse 8, and then reading on down through here, well, we'll look at the point especially about being reverent. A deacon must be reverent. Now, sometimes we look at that and we picture some white-robed person. There's a reverent-looking person here. But the idea is more of worthy of respect, that this quality that's within this person tells other people that this is a person of dignity, that his character is highly regarded. He's reverent in that way. Now in verse 9 it talks about holding the mystery of faith with a pure conscience, that his beliefs and his actions tie into what the Scriptures teach. Verse 10, that he's first tested. And think about when this letter particularly is written, that you're looking at people that are coming out of a pagan background, might be very strong in influence and abilities and etc. in life, and converting over and becoming a Christian maybe in the middle of his life. And somebody says, wow, there's a good deacon because, well, wait a minute though, but let's let him be tested in the faith for a while. Demonstrating not just in the world, but in the church that he is who he claims to be. And then after that, as we're looking at the passage here and continuing with the thought, then it's an examination of the character of an individual and an understanding that there's a time that needs to take place where the person is examined well in his faith and his faithfulness to God. So he holds the mystery of faith with a pure conscience, and then he is tested, and then he's the husband of one wife. There's a lot of things mentioned there. First of all, husband means he's got to be a man. I know there's a mention of Phoebe being a deaconess within the New Testament, and that word deaconess also is demonstrated as a term of not just a category of service within the church, but just a person that is a servant. She was a faithful servant of the Lord, and it doesn't match up at all what being described here in 1 Timothy 3 as a category now of people that God looks to as a certain leadership quality within the church. That this one has to be male, husband of one wife. Our country is deviating a lot of different ways, but it's still coming back down to the whole point here, male leadership within the church. Husband, and then he has to be married of one wife. Not multiple times, not multiple women at one time, but husband of one wife. And then describing that within that category, description of the woman is given there. And that his choice of who he has chosen for wife represents the type of character He has. Again, you're looking at a time particularly where paganism was quite the thing back in that day and time. And so it was easy to see where the person is headed by looking at his family. And this is what's being described here, not only being the husband of one wife and what she's like, but that really his children well, his household well. The idea in play here is if he could do this at home, chances are he's going to repeat this in the church realm. Things will tie up pretty much the same as far as elders here. So those are qualifications that are being described here as deacon. I know we've stepped through those kind of quickly because, number one, we have talked about these in times past. It's been a few years. And number two, at the end of services, there's going to be a large handout given to you, two different ones with elders' qualifications and deacons' qualifications. On the flip side of each one of those, respectively, is going to be an opportunity for you to write in names and hand it in. But you'll be able to examine and look at those things. If you have any questions, talk to one of our elders or any of our deacons or myself as you're looking at what's being described here as far as these characteristics. Now to elders, verse 1 of chapter 3 of Timothy. By the way, Titus chapter 1 also covers the eldership qualifications, and we'll step back and forth from one to the other in that. But again, it says, this is a faithful saying, Paul writes. If a man desires the position of a bishop, he desires a good work. Well, gentlemen, elders, you probably add more than just a good work to what's entitled to all the things that you are to do. I would say the emphasis would be on, boy, this is a good work. This is a heavy-duty job. It's not an easy thing to be an elder. Not at all. They're dealing with a lot of issues that you don't ever know about. They're not privileged to tell you about some of the things going on because people bring to them in privacy matters. And you think, well, what if our elders are doing? Well, a few of you know because you've been to them, either in times past or present. And it's a good work that they're doing, besides making sure that the congregation is operating in the right way, overseeing the congregation. A little footnote here is to remember that in Acts chapter 20, when Paul is addressing the elders of the congregation in Ephesus, that he'll use three different terms describing the same group of individuals. One time's overseers, one time's elders, and the third time's pastors, giving you a description of three different types of things that these men are responsible for. But as we're looking at the qualifications described in 1 Timothy chapter 3 here, we're recognizing this is a good work. Because they got to be overseeing the flock. They got to be managing. And they got to watch out for the souls. They got to be caring for the suffering. And they got to be dealing with issues of personal quality that a lot of people don't know about. It's a good work. Then verse 2, it says, a bishop or an elder or a pastor, same term here, it must be, and then he's going to list a lot of things here. Not maybe, or maybe you ought to hit this some of the time, but there's a set number of requirements described here. And the must be, I think, follows through when he goes down and starts talking about deacons. He must be. A good friend of mine who preaches now in a distant state said, I was telling him a long time ago that we were taking in names for elders, and all he said, boy, he said, you can't believe what people turn in. He said, I had names turned into me. He said, and people weren't even married. And he said, and the first requirement here is that, as they're talking about it, is the husband of one wife. A good person, good business mind, really spiritual minded, could teach the Bible, but these are must-be requirements that God's giving us. Must be, number one, blameless, talking about some characteristics here, and that this standard in the experienced life is must be the husband of one wife. Must be temperate. Notice the characteristics here. Sober-minded. Of good behavior. Now, as you get on down to verse 6 here, I'm going to start them out jumping down here. It says, not a novice. New Christians might be temperate, might be good quality, but they're new. I'm looking around here, and I don't know if we have somebody that fits all of that except being a new Christian. But fact is, it could have fit in that day and time in a lot of different aspects, but it can't be a new Christian. Not a novice. Experienced in life. Understands what's going on. And then it describes the home life here, as we're talking about in verse 2, the husband, again, of one wife. Same thing as mentioned about the deacon. Rules his own house well, is mentioned here. And so, as we're looking at husband and one wife, and labors through these characteristics, verse 4, rules his own house well, having his children in submission with all reverence. Believing children, one translation says. Now, there are two different takes on the term children, having children. And some look at that and say that means plural. You have to have at least 2. Could be 12, but 2's got to be there, because children is plural, not having a child. But I'm looking at it from, if Paul said having a child, then if you had 2, you couldn't qualify. And we look at some of our deacons, for instance, today, and Tim Davis is up in the balcony here operating the system, and I say, Tim, do you have any children? He'd say, well, yes. How many children do you have, Tim? He'd say, 1. But he has children. The point is, there's a household that's being managed with children. That he understands how to raise those children. That you see as being described here, when it says having children, they're in submission with reverence. Not wild and rebellious. Now, people can make a change in life after they've been raised in their home. God has given free will to us, but when they get off in their 30s or their 40s and they go some other direction, that's not reflective of the parent as much as the different choices they made once they've left the household. While they're in the household, they're representing Jesus in every way. Believing, faithful, and serving. Attributes that God says that represent the church. Now the purpose here is that this person is experienced in domestic life and taking care of things. And it helps in understanding taking care of God's children along the same way. Now his character here. The terms blameless mentioned in verse 2, temperate mentioned in verse 2, also sober-minded and of good behavior. A lover of what is good, Titus talks about in chapter 1, verse 8. There's a well-ordered life that's being described here. Hospitable, also mentioned in verse 2. Extends himself to be with the flock. Doesn't necessarily mean that he's got somebody over his house every night of the week or twice a year, but it represents how he relates to the flock. Not given to wine, total abstinence mentioned here, not a little bit, but not given at all, is mentioned in 1 Timothy 3, verse 3. Not violent, not quarrelsome, not quick-tempered or violent, Titus, chapter 1, verse 7 says. There's a control over his emotions. Some men are quick-tempered. They'll work on that maybe. But the men you want as leaders need to be even-keeled. That aren't riled up when people attack them as elders or somebody else, but handles things on an even emotional basis. Doesn't pick fights, not even verbally. Not greedy for money, not covetous, rather. Material wealth is not important. Gentle. 1 Timothy 3, verse 3. Gentle, fair, equitable is being described here. Of good reputation. That's not talking about just within the congregation, but when he's out in the business world, out with friends, on the golf course, wherever he goes, people look to him and say, there's a reflection for the church that's right. And that's the purpose behind all of this. Not self-willed. Not the man that says, I've got to be in charge, I'm an elder now, and I'm going to... No, not at all. Not that type of person. Because he's working with a team. He doesn't run the team. He's not the captain of the team. He is a member of the team. And we've seen some that are strong-willed in different places. And that doesn't fit in a team relationship with being elders. Not dictatorial, not self-willed. Understands that. And it bears a representation, too, that he knows how to relate to the flock. This isn't a dominating person. This is a person you can approach. He's a good shepherd. He knows my name. He understands how I am. I can go talk to that person. I've got a problem and I can relate. He's not going to scold me. He's going to take care of me and encourage me and motivate me in the right way. And then a few other characteristics here is just, holy, and self-control. Now, as you're looking at this whole ball of wax here, and it mentions also in chapter 3, verse 2, apt to teach, talking about the intellectual side. Titus chapter 1, verse 9, a real similar parallel as far as the intellectual side. It says, holding fast to the faithful word. It represents who this person is. I've talked about this series of lessons in a whole complete series before, and afterwards the elders would come up to me and they'd say, I think I need to step down after you've let through all those. I don't fit that. But the point is, God's not looking for perfection here, but He's setting us up with some kind of a line here that says, this is what we need to have. But when you look through Old and New Testament to leaders that God has chosen, there are no perfect leaders. You look at people like Moses we talked about last week that wasn't wanting to be a leader. And yet God says, oh yes you will. You look at David, who was a man after God's own heart. Yeah. But, and there's a great big capital B, but, look what he did. There are no perfect leaders. But these attributes, these qualities, are representative of saying this is the type of person we're looking for, understanding that perfection is never going to be achieved. Not even in God's sight. But this represents who we want. This describes that. Now, church, think about this just a moment. You know what today is, right? It's Groundhog Day. Where all the deacons come out and see if they're shit. No, not anything like that. And yet it is Super Bowl Sunday. Omaha left aside. There's going to be a lot of cheering tonight in front of TVs and at stadiums if you can afford that kind of thing. It's short-lived. Great teams, great men. Short-lived. We're looking to add great men that make an impact for eternity in God's kingdom. To continue the path that we've been singing about, the battle belongs to the Lord, that will continue on the next 100 years. That this makes a difference down the road to the souls of individuals. It's worth your support. It's worth your prayers. And the leaders that are chosen are worth your prayers and support. Men, lead. Congregation, step up and support them alongside of them. And help encourage them. Whoever is chosen along this way are going to be new at this. And are going to need help. And understanding. And a realization that they're not perfect men, but they're going to try to do their best. And with your support, the church comes out on top. And that's what we want. And that's what God wants. That God's glorified. The gospel is preached around the world and in our neighborhood. And this is what we're about. And leaders are important. Don't shrink to the opportunity of rising up. Stand with our leaders, the rest of us. Shoulder to shoulder and represent this church just like God's people needed to do that in the first century. And we'll do great things for Him. God bless us in that effort. Amen? How about you today? Are you following Jesus like you ought to be? Or does your life need straightening out? If you've gotten so far off track that you need to respond publicly, that it's been something publicly done, and you need to repent of it. And of such a nature that other people need to know, I'm sorry I've done this. Maybe it's private, maybe it's a public, maybe you've never committed to Christ in baptism. We're singing a song. You think about the words, as we ought to on every song. But if this one says, I need you to come, then come while we stand and sing.
In the name of the Savior.